The northeastern corner of the United States cradles a city whose name echoes with the weight of history. Philadelphia. The very word carries the sound of revolution, the scent of old bricks, and the pulse of freedom. It is where men once dared to dream of liberty, where pens signed the promise of a new nation, and where a cracked bell still whispers the story of independence. Visitors come in droves. They wander through cobblestone streets older than most countries, peer at the Liberty Bell behind thick glass, and take selfies at Independence Hall. The Reading Terminal Market hums with life, colors, smells, laughter, and noise. Above it all, skyscrapers reach for the clouds, modernity wrapping its arms around history. But if you take one wrong turn, or maybe the right one, you'll see another city. A Philadelphia most people don't write about in travel guides. The one you don't see on postcards or coffee mugs. Not because it isn't real, but because it's painful. This other Philadelphia lives in shadows, under bridges, in alleys that stay dark even during the day. It breathes quietly, barely noticed, and often deliberately ignored. In this city, over 4,000 people are without a home. That's not a statistic. That's a warning siren no one's listening to. And those are just the ones we count. The ones who are visible. Thousands more are hidden, sleeping in cars, on someone's floor, or moving place to place like ghosts. Invisible homelessness. And that invisibility might just be the cruelest part. These aren't just people who lost their homes. Many have lost far more: jobs, health, family, safety, and their own identities. When you sleep on a bench for long enough, when people pass you by like you're trash on the curb, even your name starts to fade. No one chooses this. No child says, "I want to grow up and live on the street." But life isn't fair. It's cold. It's brutal. And for some, it only takes one bad week to lose everything. A lost job, a divorce, a medical bill, one illness, one layoff, one mistake. And you're outside, staring up at a sky that doesn't care whether you live or die. In Philadelphia, rents are rising like floodwaters. But wages? They're standing still. Affordable housing is being crushed by gentrification. Mental health services are cracked and crumbling. The opioid crisis rips through entire neighborhoods like a plague. Combine all of that and you don't get a housing issue. You get a human collapse. Walk through Kensington and you'll feel it immediately. Not just see it. Feel it. The air is heavy. The streets worn. People slumped over in daylight. Their bodies lost to addiction. Tents line sidewalks. Used needles glint like broken promises in the gutters. But what's worse than the desperation is the silence that surrounds it. Like this is all just normal. But it's not normal. It never was. Kensington is one of the most visible symbols of Philadelphia's homelessness and drug crisis. But what most people forget, some even ignore, is that these are human beings. Real lives. Real stories. Mothers. Veterans. Teenagers. Children. The youngest reported homeless child in Philadelphia last year was just 2 weeks old. Pause for a second. Imagine that. A 14-day-old baby with no crib, no nursery, just a world of sirens, cold sidewalks, and the constant question, will I survive another night? It's easy to blame the homeless. They made bad choices, people say. They're lazy. They're addicts. But that's a shield, a way to protect ourselves from the terrifying truth that we could be them. That poverty isn't just a choice. It's often a trap. And once you're caught, getting out is like trying to climb a wall with no hands. Many of Philadelphia's homeless are working. They put in hours at jobs that barely pay enough to survive. They serve your food. They sweep your streets. They change your hospital linens. Then they go home, to a shelter, or to the back seat of a car, or to a park bench. And speaking of shelters, they're bursting, overflowing, underfunded, unsafe. For women, they're often dangerous. For LGBTQ+ youth, they can be traumatizing. For many, the shelter system feels less like refuge and more like a last resort. A place of fear, rules, curfews, and no privacy. And even if someone does everything right, gets clean, gets a job, follows every rule, the system still fails them. There simply isn't enough affordable housing. There are waiting lists for months, sometimes years. Imagine doing everything in your power to climb out of hell, only to find the ladder ends halfway up. Philadelphia does have outreach teams, non-profits, volunteers, heroes really. They bring food, water, first aid, hope. But hope runs dry fast when bureaucracy blocks every exit, when funding gets slashed, when policies favor property over people. And then there's the mental health crisis. It's impossible to separate homelessness from mental illness in Philadelphia. But while city leaders talk about behavioral health, resources are vanishing. Beds in psychiatric hospitals, full. Clinics, overwhelmed. Medication, expensive. And without consistent support, people spiral. Again and again. Take Maria, a former schoolteacher. After her husband died suddenly, she struggled with depression. She lost her job, her insurance, her home. Now, she sleeps outside the church where she once taught Sunday school. And despite her master's degree, no one hires her. Why? Because she hasn't had a permanent address in 3 years. Or take Jerome, a 23-year-old Army veteran. He came back from overseas with PTSD, nightmares. He asked for help, but it came too late. Now he lives in a tent under an overpass, clutching an American flag like a lifeline. I served my country, he says. Now I'm trying to survive it. Philadelphia's homelessness isn't just a housing issue, it's a moral one. A test of what kind of city we really are. Because for every Jerome, every Maria, there are thousands more you'll never meet. Faces that disappear in crowds. Stories never told. People we step over, ignore, forget. The city's response? Complex. There are plans, commissions, task forces, but they move slowly, too slowly. Meanwhile, winter comes every year, and with it, frostbite, hypothermia, death. In 2023 alone, more than 140 people died homeless on the streets of Philadelphia. That's nearly 3 people every single week. People who didn't live long enough to get help, who died waiting. The truth is, Philadelphia has a long, painful history of housing inequality, redlining, predatory landlords, generational poverty, and now gentrification. In neighborhoods like Point Breeze and Brewery Town, new condos rise while old families are pushed out. Rents skyrocket, wages don't. People are being priced out of the only communities they've ever known. And while some cheer revitalization, others ask, revitalization for who? We cannot solve homelessness with one-time donations or half-hearted programs. We need systemic change, rent control, mental health access, drug rehabilitation that doesn't treat addicts like criminals. And most of all, housing as a human right, not a privilege. Because what we're witnessing isn't just failure. It's abandonment. By leaders, by systems, by society. And in the heart of this abandonment are the children. Yes, children. In shelters, in cars, in borrowed motel rooms. Imagine being 9 years old and trying to do homework with no electricity. No quiet space. No meals after school. That's the reality for hundreds of kids across Philadelphia tonight. Some wear school uniforms by day and sleep on sidewalks by night. Their innocence gets erased by instability. They learn survival before multiplication. And they carry that burden into adulthood, creating a cycle that's almost impossible to break. Almost. But there are glimmers of resistance. Small sparks of hope. Local nonprofits like Project Home, led by Sister Mary Scullion, have been fighting this battle for decades, building housing, offering healthcare, creating job training programs. Their model is simple: treat the homeless as human beings, not problems to be managed. But even their resources are strained. The need is overwhelming. The waiting lists, endless. And then there's the community, strangers who bring blankets, churches that serve hot meals in the dead of winter, volunteers who offer kindness with no conditions. These are the people holding Philadelphia together, even as policy fails. But we must ask, why is charity doing the work of government? Why are teenagers organizing coat drives while billion-dollar developers get tax breaks to build luxury towers no one can afford? Why does it take viral videos of suffering for help to arrive? It shouldn't take tragedy to awaken compassion. It shouldn't take death to demand reform. Because when a city as rich in history, culture, and community as Philadelphia allows this crisis to persist, when we let people rot in tents beneath murals of liberty, we betray the very values we pretend to honor. And this betrayal is visible on every block, every train station, every alley where someone sleeps not because they want to, but because they have nowhere else. Homelessness in Philadelphia isn't invisible. It's ignored. We don't need more conversations. We need conversions of budgets into shelters, of policies into protections, of apathy into action. The people living without homes in Philadelphia, they're not strangers. They're not statistics. They're neighbors, veterans, parents, students, survivors. They are us. And unless we confront that truth, unless we treat their crisis as our own, we will continue to fail. Not just them, but the soul of our city. But hope refuses to die, even in the coldest nights. It flickers in moments you'd never expect. When a young man living under a bridge shares his only granola bar with someone hungrier than him. When a woman, sleeping in a shelter with 2 children, wakes up at dawn just to attend her GED classes. When a teenager who lost everything still manages to write poetry in the margins of a discarded newspaper. Philadelphia's homeless are not helpless. They are strong. They are resilient. They are resourceful. But they're tired of being strong just to survive. They deserve the right to live, not merely exist. And while housing is the cornerstone, we must also address the layers beneath. Mental health, addiction recovery, job training, trauma healing, family reunification. No one-size-fits-all solution will work here, because homelessness isn't a single problem. It's a web of pain, loss, and broken systems. The city's shelters, once a source of safety, are now stretched thin. Overcrowded, underfunded, sometimes dangerous. Many choose the streets over the shelters, not because they want to, but because the alternative feels even worse. The risk of theft, assault, lack of privacy, even illness. For some, sleeping under the open sky feels safer than the chaos inside. And it's not just about beds. It's about dignity. Ask yourself this: could you live without a mailbox? Without a place to shower? Without a toilet? Because that's the reality for thousands. And when people lose access to hygiene, they lose access to job interviews, to school, to medical care, to their own identity. So what's the solution? It's not complicated, it's just uncomfortable. We need permanent supportive housing. We need rent control and affordable units. We need outreach teams trained in compassion, not force. We need to stop criminalizing homelessness and start listening to those who live it. And most importantly, we need to change our lens. Homelessness is not a crime. It's not a personal failure. It's a societal one. And until we fix that society, until we reallocate wealth, reform laws, and rewrite the way we value human life, no amount of band-aids will heal this wound. The time to act is now. Because each day we wait, someone else is lost. And someday it might be someone you love. You see, most people don't think it'll ever happen to them. But all it takes is one unexpected emergency. A job loss, a medical bill, a divorce, a house fire. Just one. And suddenly the safety net disappears. You fall. And there's no one there to catch you. That's what happened to Marlene. She was 62 when her husband died of cancer. The bills wiped out their savings. She tried to keep the house, but the mortgage company didn't wait for grief to pass. One day, she came home from a food bank to find her belongings on the street. That night, she slept in her car. 2 weeks later, that car was gone too, towed after being parked too long. Now, Marlene sleeps behind a church in Kensington. She still wears the pearls her husband gave her on their 40th anniversary. "It helps me remember I'm still me," she says, even as she wraps herself in a trash bag to keep out the rain. Then there's Jamal. He was in foster care until 18, then aged out with no family, no job, no direction. He slept on friends' couches until they ran out of patience. He tried selling his blood plasma to afford food. Today, he lives in a tent near an abandoned lot, trying to stay warm with a stray dog he named Hope, and Anna, a domestic violence survivor who fled her abuser with her 2 kids. She couldn't get into a women's shelter, they were all full, so she spent nights riding SEPTA buses, cradling her children in her lap, pretending it was just a long trip somewhere safe. Their stories are real, and they are not rare. Philadelphia is full of these stories. Stories we walk past every day. Stories hidden under hoods, behind cardboard signs, beneath overpasses and inside broken-down RVs. But here's the thing. These people don't want pity. They want a chance to heal, a chance to work, a chance to feel safe, a chance to be seen. Because right now, they're invisible. They scream in silence while the city moves around them, while luxury condos rise above boarded-up schools, while restaurant goers sip $18 cocktails a block away from a man eating out of a trash can. It's not a lack of resources, it's a lack of will. Billions are spent on stadiums and surveillance, on highways and development. But when it comes to building homes for those without one, the funding suddenly dries up, the compassion fades, the excuses begin. Not in my neighborhood. It'll bring down property values. They'll ruin the community. But what community are we protecting if we're not protecting each other? You know what's ironic? Studies have shown it actually costs more to leave someone on the street than it does to house them. Think about that. Emergency room visits, jail time, cleanup efforts, crisis response teams, these all add up. But permanent supportive housing, mental health care, job placement? Cheaper, more effective, human. Yet we keep choosing the costlier, crueler path. Philadelphia did make attempts. Safe haven sites, winter shelters, outreach teams. But it's not enough. Because for every bed offered, there are dozens still waiting. Because for every outreach worker, there are hundreds more hiding under bridges, afraid to come out. Because when you criminalize being poor by ticketing tents, confiscating sleeping bags, or arresting someone for loitering, you're not solving homelessness. You're punishing it. And punishment doesn't build futures. It destroys them. Look at the youth. LGBTQ plus teens rejected by their families. Kids aging out of foster care. Runaways escaping abuse. They make up a huge portion of the unhoused population, and they're especially vulnerable to trafficking, addiction, and exploitation. Then there are the veterans. Men and women who wore a uniform, who served this country, who now sleep in alleyways and under scaffolding. PTSD, physical disabilities, and red tape make their reintegration nearly impossible. We honor them with words, but abandon them in practice. And the elderly, many on fixed incomes, priced out of their lifelong homes as rents skyrocket and property taxes balloon. They built Philadelphia, and now they're being pushed out of it. This crisis is layered. It's generational. It's racial. It's systemic. And above all, it's solvable. Other cities have made progress. Salt Lake City made headlines for reducing chronic homelessness by offering housing first, no strings attached. Houston has housed over 25,000 people in the last decade by aligning nonprofits, landlords, and local governments with one goal: get people off the streets and keep them housed. It works. The model is there. But Philadelphia? We're still debating if tents are eyesores. We're still stepping over sleeping bags on our way to work. We're still letting children grow up thinking this is normal. It's not, and it never should be. Because a city is not measured by its skyscrapers or stadiums. It's measured by how it treats its most vulnerable. And right now, we're failing. Imagine being a parent, with a toddler in your arms and nowhere to go on a freezing night. You knock on every shelter door, but they're full. You try the city's hotline, but it rings and rings. So you do the only thing you can. You ride the subway all night, holding your child close, praying they don't get sick. That's real. That's happening tonight in Philadelphia. And no, this isn't just a problem in Kensington or under the L. From Center City to West Philly, from Olney to South Street, people are sleeping on church steps, in ATM vestibules, or behind dumpsters. It's a citywide tragedy, yet we treat it like background noise. We walk faster when we see someone panhandling. We look away when someone is wrapped in a tarp. We pretend it's not happening. But pretending doesn't make it disappear. And what about mental health? Roughly 1 in 4 people experiencing homelessness suffer from serious mental illness. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression. Conditions that go untreated because services are underfunded or inaccessible. Do we really expect someone hearing voices without medication, food, or safety to just get a job? It's not realistic. It's cruel. And those who do try, who fill out applications, who stand in line at job fairs, who want to rebuild, are often denied because they don't have an address, or because their resume has a gap, or simply because of the stigma. This system is rigged. Even the city's eviction rate is alarming. In some Philly neighborhoods, 1 in every 14 renters faces eviction annually. That's thousands of families every year losing the one thing keeping them from the street. Once you're evicted, your options dwindle fast. Shelters fill up. Friends run out of space. The streets become your only option. And for women, it's even more dangerous. Women experiencing homelessness are disproportionately victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, and trafficking. Many avoid shelters because they fear for their safety or are turned away for lack of space. Some sleep in bus terminals or laundromats, hoping to blend in just long enough to survive. And through all of this, there are people trying. Volunteers handing out sandwiches, nurses doing pop-up clinics, outreach workers walking miles to find those in need. But they're stretched thin, burnt out, running on passion and duct tape. They shouldn't be alone in this fight. Philadelphia has the brains, the heart, and the history to do better. This is the city of revolution, of resilience, of grit. The city that stood tall through plagues, wars, economic collapse. So why can't it stand tall for its most vulnerable now? It's not that the city doesn't care. It's that it's paralyzed. Bureaucracy moves slowly, budgets are tight, and sometimes good intentions get lost in the red tape. But this isn't a policy debate anymore. This is a moral emergency. We're losing lives every single day. People freezing to death in winter, succumbing to heat in the summer, or overdosing alone in an alley while help is just a block away. These are lives. Mothers, brothers, veterans, kids. And every one of them deserves more than a shrug or a sideways glance. Change doesn't come just from mayors or task forces or 5-year plans. Change comes from us. From demanding better housing policies. From supporting community-led shelters. From volunteering, donating, voting with compassion in mind. And from changing the way we think. Because until we stop seeing homelessness as their problem and start seeing it as our shared failure, nothing will change. Because when someone sleeps on the street, it's not just a crack in their life. It's a crack in our society. And when enough cracks appear, everything starts to fall apart. The good news? It doesn't have to be this way. We've seen cities take bold action. Tiny home villages, guaranteed rental assistance, wraparound services that actually work. Solutions exist. Hope exists. It just needs us to act. Philadelphia, you've weathered storms before. You've risen from ashes. You've lifted voices and started revolutions. It's time to do it again. For every person sleeping on cardboard. For every child who thinks the back seat of a car is a bed. For every soul lost in the noise of the city. They need you. They need all of us. Because the truth is simple. A city isn't great because of its skyline. A city is great because of how it treats the people at the bottom. Let's make Philadelphia great again. Not through slogans, but through shelter, through dignity, through love. Let's bring them home. What if I told you that in just 1 year, over 100,000 Americans died from something you might not even think about every day? That's more than 8 times the number of people killed in shootings, nearly triple the number lost in car crashes. It's a number so staggering it could fill a stadium, and every single one of those lives was cut short by a drug overdose. Imagine that, A silent killer claiming more lives than some of the worst disasters we've ever seen. And the scariest part? This isn't some distant tragedy. It's happening right now in our neighborhoods, our schools, our families. So why are we still losing so many people to drugs? How did we get here? And what's being done to stop this nightmare? Let's rewind to 2020. The world was already reeling from a global pandemic, but another crisis was exploding in the shadows. Between April 2020 and April 2021, the CDC reported over 100,000 drug overdose deaths in the United States. That's 100,000 mothers, fathers, siblings, friends, gone in just 12 months. To put that in perspective, that's like losing the entire population of a city the size of Flint, Michigan in a single year. And it wasn't just one bad year. From 2019 to 2022, the numbers kept climbing, hitting a peak of 107,941 deaths in 2022. That's a crisis that's been tearing through America for decades, but it's gotten deadlier than ever. Why? Because of one drug that's changed everything: fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. It's so potent that just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, can kill you. Originally, fentanyl was developed as a prescription drug to help people with severe pain, like cancer patients or those recovering from major surgeries. Under a doctor's care, it can be a lifesaver. But out on the streets, it's a different story. Illicit fentanyl, made in secret labs, often in Mexico or China, has flooded the U.S. drug market. It's cheap, it's powerful, and it's everywhere. Drug dealers mix it into heroin, cocaine, even fake pills made to look like Xanax or OxyContin. People take these drugs thinking they're getting something else, and they have no idea they're playing Russian roulette with their lives. In 2023 alone, fentanyl was involved in over 74,000 overdose deaths, nearly 70% of all drug-related deaths in the U.S. That's 200 people dying every single day from this one drug. Think about that for a second. Every day, 200 families get a phone call, a knock on the door, or a visit from the police, telling them someone they love is gone. Maybe it's a teenager who thought they were taking a prescription pill they bought online. Maybe it's an adult struggling with addiction, trying to chase a high they thought they could control. The DEA seized 44 million fentanyl pills and 4,500 pounds of fentanyl powder in just the first 6 months of 2025. That's enough to kill 500,000 people with a single kilogram. And it's not just big cities. Small towns, rural communities, suburban neighborhoods, fentanyl doesn't discriminate. It's in every corner of America. So, how did this drug become the grim reaper of our time? And why can't we stop it? Let's go back to where this all started. The opioid crisis didn't begin with fentanyl. It began decades ago in the 1990s, when doctors started prescribing opioid painkillers like OxyContin at an alarming rate. Pharmaceutical companies pushed these drugs hard, telling doctors they were safe, that addiction was rare. But they weren't safe. By 2013, doctors were writing millions of prescriptions for opioids, 6.2 million in New York alone in 2020, even after years of decline. Back in 2010, over 250 million prescriptions for antidepressants and other mind-altering drugs were written nationwide. 1 in 5 Americans was on some kind of psychotropic medication. That's 70 million people, many of them on drugs that could lead to dependency. And when those prescriptions ran out, or when people couldn't get them legally anymore, they turned to the streets. That's when heroin entered the picture, and soon after, fentanyl took over. This was the first wave of the opioid epidemic. Prescription drugs flooding the market, handed out like candy by doctors and dispensed by pharmacists who often didn't ask enough questions. By 2010, prescription drug overdoses were already killing 27,000 people a year. That's not a small number. It's a tragedy that should have sounded alarms across the country. But instead, the system kept churning. Pharmaceutical companies kept profiting, doctors kept prescribing, and pharmacists kept filling those scripts. And here's where it gets really shocking. Even today, pharmacists are caught in a broken system. They're the ones handing out these powerful medications, but they're also the ones who could catch misuse before it spirals. Yet, too often, they're under pressure to fill prescriptions quickly, with little time to double-check if a patient's history raises red flags. In 2025, a ProPublica investigation exposed how the FDA allowed substandard drug factories overseas to supply the U.S. market for over a decade. That means pharmacists might be dispensing medications that aren't even safe, without even knowing it. Can we really blame them entirely? Or is the system setting them up to fail? Now, let's talk about the second wave heroin. By 2010, as prescriptions for opioids started to drop thanks to new regulations, people addicted to painkillers turned to heroin. It was cheaper, easier to get, and gave a similar high. But heroin overdoses started climbing, peaking around 2016. Then came the third wave, fentanyl. Starting around 2013, this synthetic opioid began flooding the streets, often mixed into other drugs. By 2022, fentanyl was involved in nearly 70% of all overdose deaths. And it's not just heroin users who are at risk. People buying cocaine, meth, or even fake Xanax pills are dying because they don't know fentanyl is in the mix. In 2023, nearly half of all overdose deaths involved both opioids and stimulants like meth or cocaine. That's how deadly this drug has become. It's not just an opioid problem anymore. It's a polysubstance crisis. Here's something that'll make your stomach turn. Kids are dying from this. Between January and June 2021, 1,150 teenagers aged 14 to 18 died from overdoses. That's a 20% jump from 2020 and double the number from 2019. These aren't just bad kids or drug addicts. These are high schoolers, some experimenting for the first time, others trying to self-medicate anxiety or ADHD with pills they bought off social media. The National Crime Prevention Council says 8 out of 10 teen and young adult fentanyl deaths are linked to social media contact. Teens think they're buying a legit prescription pill, but it's laced with fentanyl. In 2023, fentanyl accounted for 76% of adolescent overdose deaths. Imagine being a parent thinking your kid is safe at home, only to find out they took one pill and never woke up. How is this happening in our communities? Why are kids so vulnerable? The answer lies partly in how easy it is to get these drugs. Social media platforms have become a marketplace for dealers, and there's not enough regulation to stop it. Teens are scrolling through apps, seeing posts or messages offering pills for stress, focus, or fun. They don't know they're buying death. And it's not just teens. Adults aged 35 to 44 have the highest overdose death rates, often because they were caught in the earlier wave of prescription opioid overuse and now face a drug market flooded with fentanyl. Men make up about 70 to 75% of overdose deaths, but women aren't spared either. And the crisis hits certain communities harder. Black and Native American populations face higher overdose death rates relative to their population size, and Black Americans are incarcerated for drug offenses at a rate of 33.5 per 100,000, compared to 28.4 for white Americans, even though drug use rates are similar across races. This isn't just a health crisis. It's a social justice issue too. Let's talk about the traffickers for a minute. The DA's 2025 reports paint a chilling picture. Since January 2025, they've seized 44 million fentanyl pills, 4,500 pounds of fentanyl powder, 65,000 pounds of methamphetamine, and 201,500 pounds of cocaine. That's not small-time dealing, that's an industrial-scale operation. The Sinaloa cartel, based in Mexico, is a major player, using precursor chemicals from China to make fentanyl. They're even using narco-subs, submarines, to smuggle drugs into the U.S. In 2025, 6 traffickers from Colombia and Guyana were sanctioned for their role in this network. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection is working overtime, seizing fentanyl at the border, but it's like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. Attorney General Pamela Bondi put it bluntly, "A pill can kill, and too often it does." But here's where it gets even more infuriating. We've known about this problem for decades, and yet it's still getting worse in some ways. The U.S. has spent over $1 trillion since 1971 on the war on drugs, and what do we have to show for it? Over 1 million overdose deaths since 2001. That's 1 million lives lost, 1 million families shattered, and countless communities left reeling. Fentanyl trafficking convictions are up 461% from 2018 to 2023. But the drugs keep coming. Why? Because the system isn't just fighting dealers, it's fighting itself. In 2025, the Trump administration and RFK Jr. fired the entire 17-person team behind the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, the main tool researchers used to track this crisis. Without that data, how do we even know what we're fighting? Experts say this could lead to more deaths, not fewer, because we're flying blind. How can we solve a problem we can't even measure? Pharmacists are caught in the middle of this mess. They're the ones standing behind the counter, handing out prescriptions, trying to balance patient care with the risk of fueling addiction. In New York, a program called iStop, started in 2013, forces pharmacists and doctors to check a patient's prescription history before dispensing controlled substances. This cut opioid prescriptions by millions, but it's not enough. Pharmacists are under pressure to move fast, fill scripts, and keep customers happy. They don't always have time to dig into whether a patient is doctor shopping or if a prescription is suspicious. And with counterfeit pills flooding the market, they're sometimes dispensing drugs they don't even know are dangerous. A 2025 case in Kentucky saw a doctor sentenced to 80 months in prison for illegally distributing controlled substances. And you can bet pharmacists were filling those scripts, maybe without even realizing they were part of the problem. So, are pharmacists the gatekeepers we need? Or are they just another cog in a broken machine? Now, here's a glimmer of hope, but it comes with a catch. In 2023, something unexpected happened. Overdose deaths dropped for the first time since 2018. The CDC reported 105,007 deaths in 2023, down from 107,543 the year before. By early 2025, provisional data suggested a 24% decline, potentially saving 27,000 lives a year. That's 70 lives saved every single day. It's the steepest drop in overdose deaths ever recorded in U.S. history. In places like Ohio, deaths fell by 31% in 2024. Vermont saw a 22% drop, and Seattle reported a 15% decrease in overall drug deaths, with fentanyl deaths down 20%. This is huge. It's a sign that maybe, just maybe, we're turning a corner. But why is this happening? Experts aren't entirely sure. Some point to better access to naloxone, a life-saving overdose reversal drug now available over the counter. Others say harm reduction strategies like fentanyl test strips and overdose prevention centers are making a difference. New York's opioid prescriptions dropped by 39% from 2012 to 2020, thanks to stricter regulations. The Biden-Harris administration pushed for more treatment access and public awareness campaigns like the DEA's One Pill Can Kill. But here's the catch. The decline might not last. In January 2025, the CDC reported a slight uptick. 82,138 deaths over the previous 12 months, 1,400 more than the year before. Researchers like Keith Humphreys from Stanford warned this could be a blip or a sign that the progress is stalling. The street drug supply is still deadly, with cocktails of fentanyl, meth, and even xylazine, a veterinary tranquilizer, making overdoses more unpredictable than ever. So, are we really winning this fight, or is this just a brief pause before things get worse? Let's talk about the human cost, because this isn't just about numbers. Every one of those 105,000 deaths in 2023 was a person with a story. Maybe it was someone like Kevin Donaldson in Vermont, who survived the crisis and is now helping others. Maybe it was a teenager who didn't know the pill they took was laced with fentanyl. Or an adult who got hooked on painkillers after a surgery and ended up on the streets. The crisis hits hardest in places like West Virginia, where fentanyl overdose deaths reached 60.8 per 100,000 people in 2022, the highest rate in the country. California, Florida, and New York saw thousands of deaths, each 6,453, 5,083, and 4,950 in 2022, respectively. But even states with lower rates, like South Dakota with just 38 deaths, aren't immune. Every community is touched by this. And it's not just about the people who die. Families are torn apart. Kids lose parents. Parents lose kids. Communities lose hope. The economic toll is staggering too. Addiction and overdoses cost the US billions in healthcare, lost productivity, and law enforcement. Back in 2002, 8.2% of full-time workers were using illicit drugs, and among 18 to 25-year-olds it was 19%. That's a workforce struggling to function, a generation fighting to survive. And the ripple effects don't stop there. Schools are now stocking naloxone because kids are overdosing. Social media companies are under fire for letting dealers sell drugs online. And the justice system is overwhelmed, with drug-related arrests in states like South Dakota leading the nation. So what's the way forward? There's no single answer, but there are pieces of the puzzle coming together. Harm reduction is one. Naloxone, which reverses opioid overdoses, is saving lives. Fentanyl test strips let users check if their drugs are laced. Overdose prevention centers, though controversial, are giving people a safer place to use. Treatment is another key. Medications like buprenorphine and methadone can help people recover from opioid addiction, but only 1 in 5 people with opioid use disorder gets the treatment they need. Why? Because of stigma, cost, and a system that often prioritizes abstinence over practical help. And then there's enforcement. The DEA and CBP are seizing record amounts of drugs, but they're up against cartels with endless resources. The Biden-Harris administration invested $42.5 billion in 2023 to fight the crisis, focusing on treatment, prevention, and stopping the drug supply. But with the NSDUH survey team gone, we're losing the data we need to track progress. How do we fight a war without a map? Pharmacists could be part of the solution, but they need better tools. Programs like iStop are a start, but they're not everywhere. Pharmacists need real-time data to spot suspicious prescriptions, training to recognize addiction, and support to say no when something's off. They're not just pill counters, they're on the front lines. But they're also human, working in a system that's stretched thin. And let's not forget the bigger picture. Pharmaceutical companies like Purdue Pharma, who fueled this crisis, are finally facing consequences. In 2025, the Sackler family agreed to pay over $4.5 billion for opioid abatement, with New York getting $200 million. But is that enough to undo the damage? Can money bring back the lives we've lost? As we look at 2025, there's hope, but it's fragile. The 27% drop in overdose deaths in 2024 was historic, saving 81 lives a day. But 220 Americans are still dying every day from overdoses. That's not a victory. It's a reminder of how far we have to go. Fentanyl is still out there, mixed into everything from cocaine to counterfeit pills. Teens are still at risk buying drugs on social media. And communities of color are still bearing a disproportionate burden. This crisis started with prescription pads and greedy corporations, but it's grown into something much bigger. A beast fed by international cartels, systemic failures, and our own inability to act fast enough. So, I ask you again, why are we still losing so many people to drugs? How did we let this crisis spiral so far? And what are we going to do about it? The answers aren't easy, but they start with facing the truth. We need better data to understand the problem. We need pharmacists and doctors to be empowered, not pressured. We need treatment that's accessible, not a privilege. And we need to stop the flow of fentanyl at its source, whether that's a lab in Mexico or a social media app. This isn't just a public health crisis, it's a test of who we are as a country. Are we going to let another 100,000 lives slip away? Or are we going to fight back? The choice is ours, but the clock is ticking. Picture yourself walking down a street in Los Angeles. It's a warm evening, the kind where the city glows under golden light, palm trees swaying, and you can almost feel the pulse of dreams in the air. But then you see them, tents lined up along the sidewalk, a man curled up in a sleeping bag, a woman pushing a cart with everything she owns. And you wonder, how did we get here? How does a city so full of wealth, so full of promise, let so many people fall through the cracks. Every single day in 2023, 7 people died on these streets. Not from old age, not from some rare disease, but from overdoses, heart attacks, car accidents, or just the cold biting too deep. 7 people every day gone. That's 2,508 lives lost in 1 year, right here in Los Angeles County. Can you imagine what it's like to know your life could end like that, on a sidewalk with no one to notice? What does it say about us that we've let this become normal? I can't stop thinking about those numbers. Back in 2015, there were 44,359 people without a home in LA County. That's enough to fill a small city, all sleeping in tents, cars, or under bridges. In the city of Los Angeles alone, 25,686 people were homeless that year. I try to picture them not just as a statistic, but as people. A dad who lost his job, a kid who aged out of foster care, a woman escaping something worse than the streets. By 2023, that number had exploded to 75,518 in the county, a 70% jump in less than a decade. In the city, 46,260 people were homeless, up 10% from just the year before. I walk past Skid Row sometimes, and it's like another world. Tents stretching as far as you can see, right in the shadow of skyscrapers. Or Venice Beach, where people sleep under tarps just steps from homes worth millions. It makes me wonder, how did we let this gap between the haves and have-nots grow so wide? Let's go back to 2016. I remember hearing about the crisis getting worse, 46,874 people homeless in the county, a 5.6% increase in just 1 year. The city had 28,464 people without homes. That year, LA threw $100 million at the problem, and I thought, maybe this is it, maybe this will change things. But it didn't. By 2017, the count jumped to 55,188, up nearly 18%. I was hopeful when I heard about Measure H, a sales tax that would bring in $355 million a year for homeless services, and Measure HHH, a $1.2 billion bond to build permanent housing. It felt like the city was finally waking up, like we were saying, we see you, and we're going to help. But hope is a tricky thing. It's slow, and for too many people, it never came. In 2018, there was a small drop, 52,765 homeless in the county, down 4.4%. The city had 31,285. I thought maybe we were turning a corner. But then I learned about the 565 Native Americans counted among the homeless that year. They're less than 1% of the population, yet so many were out there struggling. It hit me hard how some groups are hit so much harder than others. By 2019, the numbers climbed again, 58,936 in the county, up 12%, and 36,300 in the city, a 16% jump. That year, over 900 people died on the streets. I try to wrap my head around that. 900 lives gone. Exposure, illness, despair. They were living 20 years less than the rest of us, their bodies worn down by the streets. I keep asking myself, how do we let that happen? Then 2020 came, and it was like a gut punch. The county counted 66,436 homeless people, up 12.7%. with 41,290 in the city. The pandemic made everything worse. Shelters closed, services stopped, and people were left to fend for themselves. In 2021, there wasn't even a count because of COVID, but the deaths told the story. 1,988 people died while homeless from April 2020 to March 2021. That's a 56% higher death rate than before. I think about those people, alone. Their lives ending without anyone to hold their hand or say their name. By 2022, the count was back, and it was brutal. 69,144 homeless in the county, 41,980 in the city. That year, I learned that 40% of California's homeless, over 29,000 people, were chronically homeless, meaning they'd been on the streets for a year or more, often battling mental illness or addiction. LA's chronically homeless population was bigger than the next 8 largest in the country combined. It's overwhelming to think about. By 2023, we hit the peak. LA County had 75,518 homeless people. The city had 46,260. That's a 9% and 10% increase in just 1 year. Over 55,000 of them were unsheltered, living in tents or cars exposed to the elements. 32,000 were chronically homeless, a number that feels like a city of its own. And the deaths, 2,508 in 1 year. That's 7 people every single day, dying from overdoses, heart disease, accidents, or violence. Fentanyl was a killer, making up 45% of those deaths, up from 27% before the pandemic. I think about those people, each one with a story, a name, a life that ended too soon. Their lifespans were cut by 28 to 35 years. They're dying at a rate 4.5 times higher than the rest of us. I can't help but wonder, what would it feel like to know your life could end like that, on a corner, with no one to notice? But then, something shifted. In 2024, for the first time in 6 years, the numbers went down. The county had 75,312 homeless people, a tiny 0.3% drop. The city had 45,252, down 2.2%. Street homelessness in the city fell by 10.7%, and the county saw a 5.1% drop in unsheltered people. By 2025, the decline grew, 72,308 homeless in the county, down 4%, and 43,699 in the city, down 3.4%. Street homelessness in the city dropped by 17.5% since 2022, and tents and vehicles were down 12.6%. I felt a flicker of hope when I heard that. Mayor Karen Bass, who declared a state of emergency in 2022, pushed hard with her Inside Safe program. It moved 4,300 people into temporary housing and 1,000 into permanent homes, clearing 95 encampments by 2025. In 2024, 28,000 people got permanent housing, 8,500 more than in 2019. It's progress, real progress. But then I think about the 72,308 people still out there in 2025, 22.7% more than in 2019. It's a step forward, but it's not enough, not even close. Who are these people? That's what keeps me up at night. They're not just numbers, they're us, they're human. Black Americans make up just 7.6% of LA County's population, but in 2023, they were 31.7% of the homeless. That's not an accident. That's a system failing people. Latinos, 43% of the county, are overrepresented too. And Native Americans, 1,692, were unsheltered in 2019, a tiny group carrying a huge burden. Then there are the kids. In 2019, 4,021 young people, 24 and under, were homeless, up 22% from the year before. By 2025, 2,699 transitional-age youth, 18 to 24, were still out there, down just 1.7%. I think about those kids, barely adults, sleeping on concrete, their dreams slipping away. How do they keep going? How do they hold on to hope? Why is this happening? I keep asking myself that. It starts with housing or the lack of it. LA's been the most crowded housing market in the country since 1990. Back in 1975, a home here cost $25,000. Now, over $1 million. A 2-bedroom apartment goes for nearly $2,500 a month. You'd need to earn $47.52 an hour just to afford it. I know people working 2 jobs who can't make that. In 2024, 54% of people who became homeless said it was because of money, lost jobs, stagnant wages, no safety net. When COVID relief ended, it was like pulling the rug out from under thousands. I imagine being 1 paycheck away from the street, the fear of it, the weight of it. But it's more than money. Mental health and addiction are tearing people apart. In 2023, 25% of the homeless had severe mental illness, 30% were battling substance use. Fentanyl's changed everything, driving up deaths and making recovery feel impossible. Then there's the bigger picture. Systemic racism, redlining, inequities that leave Black, Latino, and Native American communities with less to fall back on. It's a perfect storm, and it's drowning people. The human toll is what hits me hardest. In 2021, there were 24 fires a day tied to homeless encampments. People just trying to cook, to stay warm, starting fires because they have no other choice. Most didn't cause much damage, so they didn't lead to arrests, but 24 fires a day. That's a crisis. And the deaths, 4.5 times higher than the rest of us. Overdoses, heart disease, accidents, homicides, even hypothermia and heat exhaustion. I think about someone dying in the cold, or in the heat, alone because they had nowhere else to go. It breaks my heart. What's being done? A lot, but it feels like chasing a runaway train. In 2019, LA County spent $619 million, about $17,194 per homeless person. By 2025, it was closer to $1 billion a year. Measures H and HHH brought in billions, and Measure ULA in 2023 added more through a tax on big property sales. Mayor Base's Inside Safe program is moving people, 4,300 into temporary housing, 1,000 into permanent homes. It's cleared 95 encampments. But the pace is so slow. By 2021, only 14% of the housing promised by that $1.2 billion bond was built, at $600,000 a unit. I could buy a house in another state for that, but in LA it's barely a dent. Then there's the legal side. In 2024, the Supreme Court said cities could clear encampments even without enough shelter beds. In LA, that meant more LAPD sweeps, pushing people from one corner to another. But where do they go? If there's no housing, no shelter, no help, what's the point? It's like rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. I see the progress, though. The drops in 2024 and 2025 are real. 17.5% less street homelessness in the city since 2022. 12.6% fewer tents and vehicles. In 2024, 28,000 people got permanent housing. That's thousands of lives changed. But 72,308 people are still homeless in 2025. That's not a win. It's a reminder of how far we have to go. So what now? I keep thinking about what it'll take to fix this. More housing, sure, but it has to be affordable with mental health care, addiction treatment, job training. We need to face the systemic issues, racism, inequity that keep certain groups trapped. We need to ask why 2,508 people died in 2023, why 7 people die every day, and why we're okay with that. Are we? Because every person on the street, every life lost, is a piece of our humanity slipping away. Los Angeles is the city of dreams, but for too many, it's a place of nightmares. I don't have all the answers, but I know we can't keep walking past. We have to see these people, hear their stories, and decide they're worth saving. Because if we don't, what does that make us? When I think about Los Angeles, I don't just see freeways and movie stars or sunsets that turn the sky into fire. I see people, every one of them carrying stories we may never hear. Stories of resilience, of heartbreak, of dreams that still flicker even when life has stripped everything else away. And I wonder, how many of these stories are ending on sidewalks, under bridges, in alleys, without anyone ever hearing them? How many people are disappearing without a trace because we as a society looked away one too many times? This isn't about politics or pointing fingers. It's about humanity, because behind every statistic, there's a face. A woman who worked 2 jobs but couldn't pay rent after her landlord sold the building. A veteran who served this country, only to return and fight battles in his own mind. A teenager escaping abuse, thinking the streets would be safer than home. These are not strangers. They're people who could be any of us if 1 or 2 things in life had gone differently. The truth is, homelessness is not just about a lack of shelter. It's about a lack of connection. We've built cities that can launch rockets into space but can't guarantee a safe bed for every person on Earth. We scroll past suffering like it's another post on social media, forgetting that these are human beings breathing the same air, sharing the same city. When did we decide it was normal to walk past someone lying on cardboard as if they were invisible? But there is something we can do right now, today. It doesn't always take millions of dollars or government programs to make a difference, though those are essential. It starts with simple acts. Making eye contact, saying hello, donating to local shelters, supporting organizations that provide housing, food, and medical care. It's volunteering even one afternoon a month to serve meals, mentor youth, or help someone apply for work. And yes, it's voting for policies that prioritize housing and mental health because those things save lives, literally. Change is happening. The recent declines in homelessness in Los Angeles show that when we focus resources, when we treat people like human beings instead of problems to be swept away, progress is possible. Programs like Inside Safe are proof that lives can be turned around. But we need to push harder because the stakes are life and death. 2,508 lives lost in 1 year should shake us to our core. That's not just a number. That's an emergency. I keep thinking about one question. What kind of city, what kind of society do we want to be remembered as? The one that stepped over people dying on the street? Or the one that said, "Not on our watch. This is our moment to choose." So, if you're watching this, don't just scroll past. Share this video. Talk about this issue with your friends, your family, your community.